Hello, this is Spicy Dungeoneer and welcome to my channel. This is the second video in my series about what if Age of Empires 2 villages were Dungeons and Dragons 5e or whatever version you're playing characters. Now you could see this little meme here, shh ho, a villager is born, and be wondering what exactly that means. Shh ho is the sound that the game produces when you create a villager. And so Age of Empires 2, or Age of Empires is a variety of games, but Age of Empires 2 is my favorite of that series. And it's decades old, but it's enjoyed a resurgence of late, and it's a great game. So I hope you like it. I've realized that Dungeons and Dragons players who also play Age of Empires 2 is fairly niche, or Age of Empires 2 players who play Dungeons and Dragons is also equally niche. But I think it's useful for everybody who plays Dungeons and Dragons because it adds some flavor to your world building. So we're going to talk about villages from different cultures in the game and what things make them different from each other. So it's a real opportunity to help your world building, and you can change things. So for example, if there's a particular culture, so let's for example think of a culture that might be very good with horses and things like that, and you want to play a game set in Middle Earth and Rohirrim, and a culture that's very based on horses and all of that, then you could use some of these ideas for that culture. Or if you wanted to, let's say, use the Celts in this game as some kind of elvish kingdom or anything like that, really. So let's enjoy that and enjoy the memes as well. Like, I've been searching around for Age of Empires memes, and some of them are quite funny, and this one in particular, I think if you've played the game you can really relate to that. So basically, there's all of these technologies that affect the basic villager build. These are just some of them, and if you want to see the basic villager build, check out my first video. I'll put the link in the description. I'll put the link at the end of the video and a link in the description for the document that I'm creating with all of this stuff in a PDF, so that you don't have to madly scribble notes unless you really want to. There's all sorts of things. There's armor, there's wheelbarrow, there's loom, and different civilizations like the Spanish and the Incans get other technologies which help them. There's buildings like the lumber mill and the fishing docks and things like that that also affect villages. We might do that in another bit of a series later about how buildings affect villages. Treadmill crane helps them build quicker. So these are little things that can add flavor to your game. So here's the basics. You can see I have reduced their speed a little bit. I figure that they don't run around at full speed like the adventurers would. They, life is a little bit less exciting, and they worry about just their life in their village, so they're not running around. And you'll see later that they get bonuses to their speed, which if you started them off at 30 like most humans do, their speed become incredible. You could also role play if you wanted to that their sight. So basically, in the game, the villagers have a line of sight range of 4. I there wasn't really a mechanic in D&D that would do that. That's what, but I gave them the passive perception. But if you wanted to, the average person walking around is sort of daydreaming or thinking about their own problems, and they only notice things within, say, 40 feet of themselves, usually, unless they're looking. So that would be a way you could role play that in the game. There's a few other little differences here. I've given you some strategies about how to play them, things that they might find. So different villages would have different treasure. This would be an interesting little bonuses that the characters wouldn't expect, the players wouldn't expect, if they're suddenly, because the villagers build things, they also can tear them down a bit easier, and especially towers, that helps in the game. A lot of the things in here have game reasons. For example, the short bow as well, you can garrison villages. Anyway, monks are a problem for villagers in converting them, but we'll mention monks another time. That's the only version of magic in this game, unless you wanted to play Age of Mythology. But let's talk about this Loom, because it affects all villages and it's on your tech tree during the Dark Age. It's one of the first things you get, and it's something that will improve the armor and the hit points of your villager. And in some ways it's kind of like padded armor. Different cultures get different benefits or different ways of getting Loom quicker. For example, Goths, they just get it immediately, whereas other cultures have a time that it takes to research a different technology. So I would probably roleplay that all Goths would have Loom very quickly, so they can go and hunt the boar, which they love to do. So only villagers benefit from Loom, and there they are in their padded armor, and so I changed it like this. It also gives some more hit points, so I've increased the hit dice up to 8. One thing that I find very interesting about Age of Empires is they have this double armor class. So you have armor, which is kind of like melee armor really, and then pierce armor, which is sort of ranged armor. And I think this could be a little interesting quirk to throw into your game. It kind of reminds me of Conan RPG. Conan was a game that was based in Dungeons and Dragons 3 and 3rd edition, I should say. And it did get bogged down in the details when you made characters. And I can understand why some tables would not like to use this, but I think there is an argument to be made for a ranged armor class and a melee armor class. So this is the new villager with those changes put in. You can see that I made a little mention here about the health, because villagers normally have 25 hit points. That's way too much for a first level character in Dungeons and Dragons, and that's because in Age of Empires, villages are sort of like almost like the hit points of a community. The more villages you have, the more resources you can collect, and attacking the opponent's economy is definitely a big part of the game. Alright, so they gather resources, and I'm not really sure how much of this you're going to put in your game, but you could definitely roleplay them carrying some fish or some hunted meat or some wood or gold or stone, and that would be interesting, more interesting than just meeting a villager walking around, if every villager or commoner is the same. And encumbrance is interesting in terms of using how the villager interacts with its environment and carries resources back to the town center. So you might use the D&D rules. I went for these more simple rules than the other version. The variant, I don't want to get too bogged down in encumbrance, and I think most of us agree with that. It can be fun sometimes if that's part of your game, but it's not something that, you know, you want to get too bogged down into. There are some civilization specific bonuses regarding carrying capacity, and while looking at how the different cultures may have increased their carrying capacity, I looked at what else in the D&D world would be similar. Beast of Burden, which is terrible, because it's about animals. So I'm not trying to be insulting here by insinuating that anybody is an animal, and this rule doesn't work anyway, because giving them a large size would actually more than double. What I mean is would make the bonus for their carrying capacity too much compared to what they get to the game. So I settled on just giving them a specialization trait for carrying capacity, in which they get a plus 50 pounds to different items. So with the Aztecs, it's all of it. Goths, it's hunted meat. Dravidians, fish. Khmer, farmed food. So, this part is, getting quite bogged down in the details, and don't worry, we'll cover more combat-centered stuff later, but just if you're trying to work out ways to give each of your commoner villages a little bit of regional flavor, depending on what you're basing them on in the game, you could give them a skills or tool advantage whenever they are doing these things. So the Mongols are good at hunting, and so they always get an advantage to their rolls, anything to do with hunting. The Romans, it's quite powerful because they get 5% to everything. I'm not sure whether you want to use that or just sort of don't tell the players about it and use it sometimes. But then again, the Romans were quite powerful in the ancient world. There are other civilization changes. You can see them here about costs and stuff like that. I don't think we really want to get into all of them, but the ones that I've underlined here in red do affect us, and we'll be talking about them in more detail. Basically because especially the repair speeds and the things that shepherds can do can be quite interesting. There is some advantage to the higher ground for some of the cultures, for example. So that's quite difficult because D&D doesn't do that as much unless you want to home rule it or use the 3.5 rules, but then they should be available for everybody. So then it wasn't, if you just give a particular culture this skill, then that implies that the other cultures don't have it, whereas the high ground is the high ground. So to give them a cultural flavour, I made up that the Georgians don't suffer disadvantage on a lower terrain, and the Tatars get the +1 damage. So what do you think? Do you have the higher ground? Is this video helping you build your world and give it flavour? I hope it is. Please like, subscribe, click on the notifications button, share with your friends, leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm going to continue this series. I know it's pretty niche, but I think it's fun, and I think that it would be interesting to look at the military and other things with this game as well. But that's all for today. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.